This is very simple. You can go through and start doing this and start applying this on your own. Don't wait until you've completed all of these lessons to start developing and honing these skills and putting them to use. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum everyone. We're continuing on today with the Essentials of Arabic Grammar, an English poem on Arabic grammar. And today we're looking at chapter 3, right? The states of the ism. So we've learned about the 3 types of words in the Arabic language. And in taking a deeper look, we now know how to identify an ism, right? We know some of its telltale signs. Now we're going to be looking at the states of the ism, which tell us what role this word is playing within a sentence. And the indicator of this is through what we call i'rab, which is a term that's generally used to refer to grammatical analysis of a word, but amongst the grammarians, the definition is the change that occurs to the ending of words due to something external acting upon it. And in the next chapter, we discuss some of these external factors or impactors that affect the ism in particular. But before we do this, we need to familiarize ourselves with its states. So if a word has a dhamma at the end, then it's rafa, which means to ascend. For every word, this disposition is innate. Know this with certainty and never hesitate. If you find fatha at the end of any word, then nasb is the state for objects of a verb. If you find kasra at the end of an expression, the state of jar marks ownership or possession. So we see here that if an ism has a dhamma at the end, then it's in the state of rafa. So the sign of the state of rafa, at least as it pertains to a singular ism, is a dhamma or a dhammatain, right? Because we said al and tanween don't go together. So if you find al at the beginning of a word, then the ending will not have tanween. And if you find tanween at the ending of a word, then the beginning will not have al. So you'll see that I've put the words kitab and al-kitab in the margin of the page, signifying these different states, and also just as a reminder of the relationship between al and tanween. And rafa linguistically means to raise or elevate something. As Allah tells us in the Quran, وَرَفَعَ بَعْضَهُمْ دَرَجَاتٍ, right? And some of them we raised in degrees when speaking about the Prophets ﷺ. And so here I've indicated this meaning with a term that's synonymous to something being raised or elevated, right? To ascend. And really this is just an extra piece of information that doesn't really have any significance in the sense that we don't look at a word and say, oh, this word is raised or elevated, right? But there's a few reasons why it's here, obviously. The first is for the sake of the rhyme and to ease our memorization of this new term, right? Even though we don't know what a word in the state of rafa actually does yet, it's going to make it easier for us to memorize this new term if we have a point of reference for it. And the second, drawing a connection between the linguistic meaning of rafa and what comes next in the poem, right? Again, to ease memorization, right? So we see what comes next is, for every word, this disposition is innate. Know this with certainty and never hesitate. Meaning the default state of an ism is rafa, unless there's a reason for it not to be. In other words, it's as if the state of rafa is elevated above the rest, right? Because it's the preferred state of an ism. So if I was reading a book that had no harakat, no vowels on the letters, for example, which none of us should really be doing as beginners anyway, but let's say that I was and I came across an ism, right? No harakat, no vowels on it. When in doubt, its state is rafa, right? Unless I have a reason for it to be otherwise. And again, we don't know those reasons yet, but we're going to get there inshallah. An ism in the state of rafa can indicate a subject, a predicate, an adjective, the doer of a verb, right? The doer of an action, and more that we'll take a look at inshallah. And throughout the remaining chapters, we'll take a look at the many different roles that a word in the state of rafa plays. But to introduce them here all at once would be counterproductive. The 3 most important things to take away from this section is that firstly, rafa is one of the states of the ism. Second, the sign of this state is either a dhamma or dhammatain at the end of a singular ism. And third, that it's the preferred state of every ism. So it's the default state of every ism. Have no doubt about this, right? If you find fatha at the end of any word, the nasb is the state for objects of a verb. So the second of the 3 states of the ism is the state of nasb. And a fatha or fathatain at the ending of a word is how we know that it's in a state of nasb. And even though a word in the state of nasb can play multiple different roles within a sentence as well, here I identify one of the main roles that a word in the state of nasb plays within a sentence for the sake of ease. And that is the fact that it typically gives us some key information or details about an action. For example, how it was done, why it was done, where it was done, the state of the one who did it, right, etc. And the second indication of this role is that it typically comes after a verb. So nasb is another one of the states of the ism. The sign that a word is in the state of nasb is a fatha or fathatain at the ending, and it typically gives us some key information about a verb. If you find kasra at the end of an expression, the state of jar marks ownership or possession. So this is the third and final state of the ism, the state of jar. And a kasra or kasratain at the ending of an ism is a sign that it's in the state of jar. Even though a word in the state of jar can play multiple different roles, here again I identify one of the main roles that a word in the state of jar plays within a sentence. And that is the fact that it typically indicates that something is in the possession or ownership of another. So to summarize, the state of jar is one of the states of the ism as well, right? The third and final state. The sign that a singular ism is in a state of jar is a kasra or kasratain at the ending, and it typically signifies that something is in the ownership or possession of another. So let's take a quick look at some examples from the Quran to see how this fits together practically. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. So we see Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and the word ism, which is attached to the ba is a harf here, and that's why the word ism has a kasra on it, which means that it's in the state of jar. Right? I don't want to say fun fact, but it's known that specifically in the Basmala, you won't find alif here, right? So the alif that would be here, typically, it's removed in the Basmala. I'm going to try to stay away from doing too much extra stuff here. So we're going to be looking at every harf that impacts an ism, right? So I'm not going to really focus too much there, but we see here in the beginning that the word ism has a kasra at the end, right? Signifying that it's in the state of jar. And then we see lafdul jalala also with a kasra at the end, signifying that it's in a state of jar as well. And here is where we actually see this concept of ownership or possession taking place, right? It's the name of Allah. So with the name of Allah, with Allah's name, then we see Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, right? Two of the names of Allah, two attributes that act as a substitute, you could say, an extra description of the name of Allah. Right? So it would be like the equivalent of saying Salim, the student, right? So here it's Allah Ar-Rahman, right? Who is Allah? Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, right? So they both have kasra at the end, right? They follow suit. This tells us that it's in the state of jar, right? Then we see Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So Alhamdu, we know that this is an ism because it has al at the beginning, right? At the end, we see this dhamma, right? So there's a dhamma at the end which tells us what? That it's in the state of rafa, right? Lillahi. So again, the lam here at the beginning is a harf and it's impacting lafdul jalala, which is why it has a kasra at the end, right? Signifying that it's in a state of jar, right? Same with Rabbi, right? Rabbi. So we see this kasra at the end. It's in the state of jar. So we're going to skip over al-alameen because it's actually a plural, and we're going to talk about plurals in the next section of this chapter, inshallah. We see Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, again, both in a state of jar, right? We see this kasra at the end of each word. Maliki yawmiddin, right? Lot of kasras at the end here, right? Because all of this goes back to lafdul jalala, right? Which is in a state of jar. And again, we said it's either kasra or kasratain that we'll find at the end of a word, which will signify that it's in a state of jar, right? So we're going to skip over the next ayah because there's a lot of other things happening here that we're going to take a look at going forward, inshallah. But we see here, ihdina as-sirata, right? Fatha at the end of as-sirata, which we know is an ism because of the al at the beginning, right? But we see this fatha at the end, right? And we said fatha or fathatain at the end of a word tells us that it's in the state of nasb. And we also said that the state of nasb typically gives us some key information about an action, right? Now, I did mention this briefly. We'll be discussing this more when we get into the chapter on the fi'l, but the command tense is also a category of the verb. And ihdina is in the command tense. So when we say command tense, it's used to either request something, like a dua, or to command something, right? So obviously here in this context, right, after we praise Allah, we're asking Him, right? Ihdina, guide us. Guide us to where? As-sirata, right? The path. So we can see this correlation here, how it gives us some key information about this particular verb. And we said also that you'll see it after a verb. So this is the case here. As-sirata al-mustaqima. So we see this here as well. Fatha at the end. They're both related. We're going to look at this type of fragment very shortly as well in the next chapter. But we see here at the end, fatha, right? Telling us that it's in a state of nasb. So both of these give us some key information about this verb, this request, this dua. Sirata, again, we see here, fatha at the end. Now this path is being described, so it's still in the same state, right? And we said fatha at the end, it's in a state of nasb. We're going to skip over the rest and take a look at al-maghdubi. We see here, kasra at the end, right? Telling us that what? It's in the state of jar. So in the Fatiha, we see a lot of nouns that are in a state of jar. We also see a lot of nouns that are in the state of nasb. And really there's only one here that is in a state of rafa. This is very simple. You can go through and start doing this and start applying this on your own. Don't wait until you've completed all of these lessons to start developing and honing these skills and putting them to use. I believe I've mentioned it before, but each of us should have some sort of daily wird of the Quran that we do, even if it's one page, not just reciting the Arabic, but also finding a sound translation that we connect with, looking at its meanings, but also really seeing these concepts in action, right? Don't think that these minute details are insignificant. Now we can see that the vowels or harakat that are placed on words are a means to more than just helping us recite or read correctly. They convey to us specific meanings because it helps us understand what role these words are playing within a sentence. So next we're going to take a look at the second part of this chapter, which further expands on the states of the ism and the signs of these states when more than one person, place, or object is being discussed. I hope this lesson was beneficial. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.